Hello and welcome, one and all. My name is Brandon Martin, and this is my revised version of the presentation I gave back in 2016 at the Seed 1 conference held at Skatopia. It is called An Aggregated Synthesis of Occult Knowledge, Part 1, Initiation into Natural Law and the Key to Freedom. This presentation will be regarding questions and answers, such as, what is the occult? What is truth? How does the brain work? What is natural law? What are rights? What is morality? What is true anarchism? We will be diving deeply into a vast amount of psychology, understanding of the ideologies that are perpetually keeping the state of slavery in place. And I'm going to start off with a beautiful quote from the book The Kybalion. Where fall the footsteps of the master? The ears of those ready for his teaching open wide. When the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh the lips to fill them with wisdom. So why are we here? We are here to seek the truth and speak the truth. So my presentation style was directly derived from Mark Passio's work and many other great researchers. So this is not all my work. It is an aggregated synthesis of occult knowledge from a vast amount of researchers. If I happen to have seen further than others, it is only because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I am very grateful for being able to present this information here today. I just wanted to say a thank you to all the individuals that have come before that have done the great work, that have given us the capability to share this type of information. The information contained within this presentation could not possibly accomplish covering all aspects of the topics that I have chosen, nor am I claiming that I have the totality of that knowledge. I am only here to share what I have come to learn and understand as the most important hidden knowledge out there. Even though there will be blanket statements, I am not attempting to convince anyone to believe anything contained in this presentation. I only ask you to keep an open mind and to seriously consider this information provided. I am only looking to influence you into doing your own due diligence into researching these topics for yourself. The worst thing you probably could do here today is blindly believe what I say and take it in without doing your own homework. Bullshit minutia or minutia. Minutia means something small or trivial details of something with lack of importance. So keyword there, trivial. Paying attention to trivialities like how I look, dress, or speak will only distract your mental focus away from the critical information being presented. The information is what is of importance, not me. Please be aware of any internal impulses to reject this information provided in this presentation solely based upon your first initial response to it. It is a logical fallacy to gauge the veracity of the truth in any information based upon how you feel when first seeing or hearing it. So I'm asking you to set aside your emotional reactivity to the information provided here today. It is not about knowing it all, and I'm not here to claim that I know it all, like I stated earlier. And it's not about focusing on every small detail or the trivial minutia. The truth that I speak here today will eternally remain the truth. Ignore the message of truth at your own peril. Most people have a false understanding of what ignorance actually is. They think that ignorance just means to not know, and they are very wrong. So this is a word that most people have never heard of, and it's nescience. And it is the actual definition of what they're thinking of, to not know, meaning knowledge is unattainable or was absent, or both. So you can see here, nescience is from the Latin verb nesciere, to not know because knowledge was absent or unattainable. So an example of this would be my neighbor is having a heart attack and I have no information provided to me. Thus, I have no way of responding because I have no knowledge of what is actually occurring. So I am not morally culpable if my neighbor has a heart attack and I do nothing. Ignorance is from the Latin verb ignorare, to not know even though necessary information was present, because that information has been willfully refused or disregarded. And you're going to be seeing a lot about ignorance in this presentation today. We are only as blind as we want to be. And you see here I have the three monkeys representing the three evils. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And I would rephrase that to hear no truth, see no truth, speak no truth. It takes a considerable amount of knowledge just to realize your own ignorance. One of the first steps is realizing the absolute ignorance that you are under, because the mass majority of us are under our own willful participation in ignoring the criticalness of the situation that we are all in. Ignorance is not bliss. Get as offended as you like about that statement. One of the most common and stupid beliefs is the false notion that ignoring the negative will make it go away. And this is absolutely ridiculous. If there is a tornado headed towards your house, ignoring that reality will not make it go away. It is an act of sheer will to ignore that which is crucial for ending suffering and slavery. This whole presentation is going to be in context of ending suffering and slavery, raising our consciousness above the level of consciousness that created the problem. This is about bringing us together in the requirements that are necessary for attaining what we claim we want, which I hope we all want to end slavery and suffering. The lame excuse that because it makes me feel better or it is bliss to ignore it is the mindset of a cowardly house slave, which would rather sit back and let their brothers and sisters of the world be enslaved than to pay attention and actually do something about it. Ignorance of the negative is a symptom of insanity and emotional mind control, allowing the imbalance of solely basing all judgment on how you feel is a symptom of emotional mind control. Looking at controversial information is the only way to find solutions to the problems that we are facing today. Ignoring the negative ensures we get more of it. Going back to that tornado scenario, if we continue to ignore that, the consequences are going to unfold no matter what. In either scenario, obviously, the consequences are going to unfold, but with the knowledge and the awareness that the tornado is headed towards your house, you are capable of now steering the negative consequences away from you. So it at least gives you the potential to change what is happening. That way you can protect your freedom. The only bliss in ignorance is to be less than that of which you should be. And this is a little thing known as green language, which is about finding occult information within philology. So if we phonetically pronounce bliss and vowels are interchangeable, we see here that B is phonetically B-E, B, and then liss, or if we replace the I with the E, we get less, so be less. So yeah, ignorance is bliss in that context, because you're not being what you should be. You're not ascribing to a more healthy worldview and self-view so that you enhance your consciousness so that we come together here in this world and create change. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. Gustave Le Bon. And he wrote the book The Crowd. And I believe that's where this quote came from. Another thing that is just absolute garbage, which can be connected to what I was just talking about, is the notion of killing the messenger because somehow the message is distasteful to us. The message is the most important part, not the messenger. It has nothing to do with who said it, how it was spoken to you. All that's truly relevant is whether it is true or not. And it is your karma and responsibility for what you do with what you know to be true. So in the past, there would be people who would actually violently assault and accost people because the message was distasteful. And I mean, this happens currently today, but, you know, I'm sure we've all seen a scene or a depiction of a messenger being decapitated by the order followers of the king to start a war. There are those who would violently accost the messenger if they find the message somehow distasteful or if it contradicts their current personal ego attachment to a false axiom or axioms. Many people even seek vengeance on those who break down their ego barriers. The truth is belligerent in times of mass deceit. Thus, it is very likely that you could be triggered because of the vast amount of lies you believe. The guy on the right here is Hermes, the messenger of the gods, and considering that this information is about natural law, I thought that this slide was pretty important to what we're talking about here today. So don't ad hominemly attack me because you find something in this message distasteful. If you don't like the way I'm teaching it or what I'm talking about, then you're welcome to go to a different flavor of teacher or a different style of teacher out there. There are many different styles, and you will notice that the essence of the information that at least the natural law teachers will be the same. You're going to hear a lot of repetitive information because they're going to be hitting on the roots of the same principles, and they are not going to change because they're all based in truth. This is a warning for those egos. It's not all about you, nor is it all about me. Another key component to the message that I'll be stating here today is about the death of the ego, and that is metaphorical. We literally don't want to kill our ego because ego is a tool and it can be used properly or abused, meaning improperly. If the ego is in control or rulership of the temple of self, that is when we start to have issues. So this is something I will be covering very in depth in part 2. So I'm not going to get into it extremely detailed here. Some of those negative expressions of ego are ego attachment, ego identification, and superego. Telling the truth and making someone cry is better than telling a lie and making someone smile. So this whole message here today is about harsh truth. And like I stated earlier, we have to kind of grow a pair or put our britches on so that we can deal with the truth of the condition of humanity. The more self-knowledge, the lesser the ego. The lesser self-knowledge, the more ego. This is something that I've very readily recognized in people. The lack of understanding of what I would call the higher self, or a being that is in harmony with nature or natural law. Their ego tends to be far less in control. I personally was lucky because I had a small ego. Actually, I would say that my ego was atrophied, and I had to strengthen it to bring out my more assertive side. The ego can be, like I said, a positive attribute if we use it for things like playing guitar or making presentations. Keep in mind that this presentation is intended only to be a stepping stone for individuals. It is not intended to be a camping zone. It's always nice to take a rest, but this work is to be used as a spiritual springboard or fast track to the deepest occult knowledge about freedom, so it is not a permanent residence. So what I'm saying here in the bottom side, and this is something I've learned in the past couple years, we all need to take a break and take a point where we rest and recover. This is just like working out, exercising. You're going to tear the muscles, and then they have to have a time of recovery so that they heal. And this is the same process with the study of the self and natural law and the ebb and flow of consciousness, the rhythm, the cycle, etc. I'm not personally doing this to be liked, praised, or to be put on any kind of pedestal, though I do hope it brings us together in the understanding of natural law and freedom. So this is not about the likes. It's about spreading knowledge. This is completely about spreading knowledge. So what to expect here today? Well, I'll be covering a 3-step phase, a triune approach to the initiation into the occult. And part 1 will be the initiation into the floor, the base of all the knowledge that's needed. So we're going to be covering things like epistemology, solipsism, and we're going to be working our way, trying to build this information in our minds in an organized format so that we can really understand the principles of natural law. Mark Twain said, "Truth is stranger than fiction, but it's because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities. Truth isn't." And I'm going to be explaining that a little bit more here later. It pays to keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out. So stay open, but be ready for anything. So my point here is, be on guard. I'm not going to be completely accurate about everything. I might misspeak here and there. I'm doing the very best I can to bring the most accurate truth about natural law to you, and scrupulously going through it and getting rid of anything that is inaccurate or untrue. Part 1 is definitely going to be a blanket absolute statement that it is the most important knowledge that one must understand to build a better world today. So let's begin here. What is the occult? Let's define the word occult. The word occult is rooted in the Latin adjective occultus, which means hidden from sight, which comes from the Latin verb occultare, to hide, conceal, to keep secret. Both are in turn derived from the Latin noun oculus, which means eye. So we can see how this all is related to each other. And I think this picture here really depicts the occult. On the underside, obviously, that which we cannot see, that which is concealed. So if we were standing on the top and we had little knowledge about anything where we cannot see. Another example of this is, let's say you're sitting in your room and you have a guitar, and that guitar is facing towards you, meaning the front of it is facing towards you. Well, you cannot see the back of it. So that would be the concealed or the hidden part of that guitar. And since you cannot see it, many have questioned whether it would actually exist or not. In philosophy, you get into questions like this. Obviously, it does, Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And just because you do see it doesn't mean it was true or real. We have to be very careful when discerning what is true and what is not. So specifically, the occult is about hidden knowledge. And why would such knowledge be hidden or concealed from the mass of humanity? Well, knowledge being hidden or hoarded creates a power differential. A knowledge differential creates a power differential. So we can see here on the right side the hierarchical structure of hidden knowledge. So knowledge held by few at the top, and as you come down, you know, you get to the ignorant masses of humanity. So there's a lot more ignorance at the bottom of the temple than at the top of the pyramid. And I said temple, I meant to say pyramid. The control of information is something the elite always does, particularly in despotic form of government. Information, knowledge is power. If you can control information, you can control people. Tom Clancy. And I completely agree that the control of information is the control of people. Knowledge itself is not power, but it is the pathway to power. Just because you know things don't mean you're going to apply it. So this is a working definition for the occult, or the word occult, and it comes from the researcher Mark Passio, who I mentioned earlier. The occult is a body of science which is not widely known to the general population, consisting of hidden knowledge about the workings of the human psyche and the laws of nature, both seen physical laws and unseen spiritual laws. So this is pretty much about the micro and macrocosmic knowledge in the universe, that which resides within us and the realm in which we operate and function in, reality. So occult knowledge is a tool, and the level of consciousness wielding this tool determines the result. If he uses it for a positive creation, it will be good. If he uses it for a negative creation, it will be bad. So if we take this knife up in the top left-hand corner as occult knowledge, well, this knife is simply a tool. It can be wielded to cut bread, to cut fruit, to feed people, to defend oneself, or it could be used to violate people. The same with the tool in the artist's hand. And, you know, occult knowledge can be a tool for the enhancement of consciousness. Actually, that's what it's all used for, but, you know, like Tesla's knowledge. Well, it's been occulted, and that knowledge is really crucial for the enhancement of consciousness, and it could be used for a very positive thing. But it also can be used to brainwash people, to enslave people, to entrance them, to hypnotize them. It is all determined by the level of consciousness that is wielding the tool. The result will either be good or bad based on whether it is a high consciousness or low consciousness, or a loving consciousness or a fearful consciousness. The format matters. The formative years are some of the most crucial years for laying really healthy programs into a child's mind. And I highly recommend any parents to understand this information in this presentation so that they can raise their children in consciousness and the understanding of their natural born rights. Human beings are programmable. They're neither good nor evil. You know, we are epigenetic beings, mostly, you know. I mean, in truth, epigenetics incorporates genetics, so we're 100% epigenetic beings. But a lot of people like to split those up, and I personally don't agree with that. So truly, we are 100% epigenetic beings. The building blocks of human manifestation. The first block is the input. So you're going to see that this can be related to the trivium, which we're about to get to. So knowledge or lack thereof. This consists of potential information and knowledge that may be gathered, processed, understood, and acted upon by individuals, which leads to an understanding or lack thereof. So you either understand what you have gathered or you do not. This is the decision-making processes. These processes take place in the human mind and are chosen by each individual based upon the available information in the previous block, which leads to the output. So the previous block was the processing or the logic, and the block before that would be grammar or the input. Next block, which is wisdom, which would be the output or action or lack thereof. So this is human behavior. Each individual's behavior is based upon the quality of their decision-making processes, which in turn are based upon the quality of their available information, which leads to the generated result in society, whether it is orderly or chaotic. And I would more accurately state that as whether there is freedom or slavery. So this is the manifested reality. The quality of the condition which manifests in any society is based upon the aggregate quality of human behavior within that society. Now this slide here came from Mark Passio, and a lot of these came from Mark's work. And I feel that this slide is one of the most important slides out there. So I have this slide hanging on my wall, and it's something that I point out to guests that come to visit me very frequently. It is so useful to have this around and show this to children because they will pick up on it. So true learning, which is actually self-mastery. You know, this initiation phase, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. And what we're going to learn in the next section is a simple overview of the Trivium. But to understand this, you have to understand it in its whole, which is the 7 liberal arts, which is the Trivium and the Quadrivium. The triangle on top of the square, which for those who know will understand what I mean. So Trivium means 3 roads, and it starts linearly from grammar, logic to rhetoric. Okay, those don't go out of order. Rhetoric doesn't come before logic, and that's something you'll see often, is that they'll put rhetoric before logic, or they'll switch grammar and logic, or take grammar out. I've even seen logic taken out sometimes. It's just absolutely ridiculous, the corruption they've done to this. But this is something that has been taken out of the education system, specifically because it teaches you how to think like a free individual. It allows you to use your discernment properly. And this correlates to the slide before, which was about knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, grammar, logic, rhetoric. So the Quadrivium is the 4 roads: arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And this picture below is an online image I found of the 7 liberal arts. The Trivium was regarded as the basis for educating the free person because these 3 disciplines enable a person to comprehend, analyze, formulate, and communicate ideas. These form the basis for the liberal arts education, which I was just speaking about. So here's a good depiction of the Trivium, which we can look at the function of a tree or a plant to see how this works in a basic 3-phase category. So you have the roots, which takes in the information, the knowledge. It is the aggregator. It is the grammar, the input. Then you have logic, which is the understanding. You know, the how and why. It's learning, it's growing, it's in the vegetative process. You know, it's stretching and reaching and experiencing the world, etc. But it's the process of understanding. And the output is the fruit. bearing the wisdom, the fruit of wisdom. So the leaflets and the fruit are the output, the branches and the leaflets and that which it produces. And this is a really basic understanding of the trivium. So always start with your grammar. So gather your information and then process it and filter out any inaccuracies and then apply it. So this is where we're going to get our suppositions at. This is something that a lot of people steer clear of, but I felt that it was necessary to add in as the base of the temple. And we will be talking about Freemasonry, Masonry, and esoteric Freemasonry in part 2. The first slide is the first degree tracing board of Freemasonry, and I chose that specifically because it is the floor or the base of the temple, and that's where we're starting out from as the initiate, and we're going to work our way up. The base of the temple should be epistemology, because we need to start with the gnosis, or at least the assumption. I would highly recommend the gnosis of it, but if you have at least the assumption, it's better than nothing. It's better than being ignorant. So at least the assumption of whether or not knowledge is attainable, truth is objective, etc. So pretty much what we're finding out is whether we're a solipsist or not. So epistemology is from the Greek episteme. I believe that's how you pronounce that, which means knowledge. And it's the study or theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits, validity, and scope, its magnitude. Where does it come from? Does it exist? Can we come to know things, etc.? Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified knowledge, truth, from opinion. We're going to be starting off with the supposition that you can come to know things. And I'm only using that word supposition because people have a real big problem with absolutes. But the absolute gnosis of this is the true knowledge of these suppositions here I'm about to lay out. I'm using the word supposition, and yeah, you could say it's a euphemism if you want to, but I'm using it to be a little bit sympathetic towards people who are going to assume that truth is objective rather than having the personal gnosis of it. And I have met people like this, that they can't reconcile nature as, the evidence. They can't reconcile. Pretty much they're in a left brain imbalance, and they rely far too much on logic and reason, and they don't understand natural law. But yet they understand the logical conclusion that you have to start out with objective truth, or else everything else you build from, it will just collapse. So whenever people say truth is subjective, they are stating it in an objective form. So they are saying that it is true that truth is subjective, which is an objective statement. Our gnosis and or suppositions for those who are in a left brain imbalance, and hopefully this presentation can help bring you out of that, is that truth is objective and knowable, solipsism is false, natural law is discoverable and innate, morality is objective, and all that was just stated defines freedom. I wanted to start out with epistemology so that we could get a good reference in at least a philosophical basis of whether knowledge is real or not. I'm not going to go into a real deep philosophical understanding of the study of it, meaning the actual epistemology, but I want people to start looking into that. That's why I mentioned it. We don't hear it very often, and I wanted them, or all of us to know that we are starting with the gnosis that there is such thing as knowledge, and we are capable of discovering natural law and living in alignment with it. So in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, Plato has Socrates describe a group of people who have lived chained to a wall of a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall, like shown in the image. So you see how the prisoners of the cave, they cannot turn their heads, they cannot see what is behind them, and what is projected on the wall in front of them, the shadows which are being projected from the objects in between them and the fire that are being held up by other individuals. They actually believe that these shadows are the reality. The people watch the shadows projected on the wall from the objects passing in front of the fire behind them and give names to these shadows. They deify these shadows. They make stories up about the change, and they try to predict what shadows will come next, and they even, give awards and honor to the individual who can predict the story of what's about to happen with the shadows. So they actually believe that the shadows are the reality. So imagine now if one of these prisoners was freed or escaped and happens to ascend. Well, first when he sees the fire, the light emanating from the fire is going to blind him, and he is going to go through a painful acclimation of being able to see. He'd be able to see the shadows more clearly than actually what was in front of him. And eventually, he would climb his way out of this cave, or is led out of this cave, in whichever depiction that you look to. This one we're going to go that he has escaped himself, and he climbs his way out of this cave. When he comes to see the sun in the outside world, it's kind of the same as when he first saw the fire. He's not going to be able to see anything. Actually, it's going to be amplified extremely. So he's going to go into this complete haze, and actually exactly like when you've been in a dark room and then you go outside and you kind of have to adjust and refocus your eyes, obviously. This is an allegory for ascension into the light of truth, love, and knowledge. So Socrates explains how the philosopher is like a prisoner who is freed or escaped from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not reality at all, for he can perceive the true form of reality rather than the manufactured reality that is the shadow seen by the prisoners. So imagine if you were this individual and you came out to see this beautiful, glorious world filled with all these vast amount of creatures and insects and animals, plant life and colors and dimensions and shadows. So, he's going to realize very quickly that the shadows are just projections from the object, and then eventually possibly come to venerating the sun as the life giver, or the one who creates the seasons. When the individual that is freed or escapes, or any of the prisoners that eventually are freed and come into the light of truth of the reality, it can be very blinding or also very painful for the individual, because allegorically they have never seen reality before. They've never seen the truth before, and they've never used their eyes before. Like in the scene from The Matrix, when Neo is first awakened, he asks why his eyes hurt, and Morpheus replies, because you've never used them before. And this is the same thing. The prisoners have never been adjusted to reality, so they have to acclimate their senses, and they have to acclimate their beliefs and their knowledge, because it can become very painful to see what the truth of the condition of humanity is. Can be very painful. When you look at it, it's always painful, but you learn to cope with that over time, because you understand that there are potentials for solutions, and you are empowered to make those changes yourself, because now you are out of the cave. You have stepped into the truth. So the idea here is that the journey is to step out of the darkness of ignorance and come into the light of truth and love and knowledge. So imagine if this prisoner that has been freed and ascended and has come into the light of reality tries to go back into the cave and free another prisoner. Well, at first, when he goes back into the cave, his eyes also wouldn't be adjusted to the darkness, so he might not see the shadows as well as the other prisoners, so they might think that he has tainted his own vision by going out there. And this can be like related to an individual who doesn't see things that are, commonly enjoyed by the ignorant masses, such as an over attachment to sports and entertainment and Hollywood, etc. The prisoners, when they are introduced to the freed prisoner and he is trying to, break them loose and get them to come with him out into reality, and he's trying to explain to them that the shadows that they see are not real, they mock him and ridicule him, and over time, eventually, one by one, they do come out. And they have that same experience of their eyes being burned by the sunlight because it's so bright and they've never adjusted to it before. What he explains to them about the nature of those things is going to be completely different than how they understand it. So they're going to mock him and ridicule him and scold him and attack him ad hominemly. Most likely he would have to drag one prisoner out of this cave, kicking and screaming into the light, almost forcing them. This is usually how it goes. But either way, whether the prisoner does it on his own or he is drugged, kicking and screaming, there is resistance and the painful realization of the condition that they were once in. And even as these prisoners are released, some of them might want to go back into the cave or into their ignorance and stay in the shadows rather than actually understand the reality outside. They might think the outside reality is the deception. So these prisoners would actually think that the truth of reality would be what they see inside the cave, instead of what the freed prisoner has come to understand as the actual truth. And this is all an allegory for our awakening process. It's the study of epistemology. What is knowledge? What is reality? These guys are questioning reality, and then their whole paradigm of how they think is completely broken when an individual who happens to understand the truth of it comes back and explains to them that what they are looking at as real is not actually real. This can also be correlated to an individual's own experience with trying to awaken people currently to what's going on in reality. And obviously that's why I'm trying to bring this to the table, because this relates to all of us who are in this process of doing the great work and trying to share and help people to raise up into a higher direction, which leads me into the absolute delusion, is what I've been calling it, which is solipsism. And solipsism is from the Latin solus, meaning alone, and the Latin ipse, meaning self. And it is a delusion based in one believing that the self can know nothing at all, or only its own modifications, and that anything outside one's own mind is unsure. Hence, there is no such thing as objective truth. Thus, it does not exist or matter. You can see in the image that everybody else is an illusion, that they're only figments of the one individual. They're figments of his own mind, that everybody and everything else is a construct of the individual's own perception. And you can see these two images as good depictions of solipsism. Solipsism, the most dangerous and deplorable mindset in the world. Imagine the hubris and the absolute absurdity in telling other people that they don't even exist. It is literally stating that I am God of all. One thing I point out is when they are saying nothing can be known, is that they are actually stating they know that nothing can be known. Thus, their argument is shattered because their supposition, and this is an actual supposition, is that nothing can be known, or that they can know nothing. Yet they're claiming to know that they know nothing. So these suppositions are actually wrong. So that's why I was saying that about the idea of suppositions. We actually need to get away from suppositions and get into gnosis. But I'm using that as a means to understand its failure, because suppositions are a failure to understand the objective knowledge of truth. So this is a reality check. Nothing is known about X, yet we know something about X because we said we know nothing about it, just like I was stating. So you can see how this is a very delusional and circle think ideology when you get into these realms of thinking and subjectivity, where you claim to be God and that everything is just a figment of your mind. And you can see this in the whole New Age bullshit that's going on in our culture. What is truth? Well, truth is objective, meaning that it is not based on the perceptions of any being, which are capable of wavering dramatically away from truth. Truth is unwavering. It is simply that which is. It is that which has occurred in the past and that which is occurring in the present. Truth is singular. There is only one way things actually are. That which is the truth will forever and always remain the truth, no matter how anybody feels about it, no matter what they don't like about how it was spoken or whatever aesthetics it came in, whatever form. It simply is that which has occurred in the past and that which is occurring in the present. It's not in the future. The future doesn't exist. The truth does exist, so it has to obey that law of non-contradiction. The truth is that which has happened in the past and that which is occurring currently. So I put the picture of Ma'at here, which is the Egyptian goddess of truth and justice and natural law. And I thought it was a very accurate depiction of what I'm trying to relay here. Truth and frequency of perception. So, you know, when we're talking about this, we're going to look at this blue solid line as the plane of truth. It is simply that which is, unwavering, unchanging. And I know a lot of people say, well, just zoom in on the line and you'll get a wave. Well, that's not what we're looking at this at. That's not the level from which we are looking at this depiction. The wave function is our perception. A higher frequency or a clear perception has a higher alignment with truth, meaning that it interacts more frequently than the lower frequency of perception. So if we look at these spaces in between the points of interaction where the frequency meets with truth, we see that there are far more of them on the higher frequency. So as we raise consciousness, we become more aligned with that which is reality and truth. Or we have more frequent interaction and contact with reality, truth, and natural law. It is simply that which is. And our understanding of perception has been warped by obfuscation. So perception is a tool, another tool for our consciousness, and it's like a lens. So the word perception comes from, it's the act of perceiving, so it comes from perceive. And perceive comes from the Latin verb percipere, I believe that's how it's pronounced. The Latin prefix per, which means through, and the Latin verb sapere, or cipere, or capere, which means to take in, to seize, to understand. So the basic definition is to become aware or conscious of that which is, to recognize, discern, or understand, meaning with clarity. it's a discovery, you know, it's a process of discovery. Awareness of elements of the environment through physical sensation interpreted in the light of experience. You know, how aware are you? How frequently are you interacting with the truth? Direct or indirect intuitive cognition. So it's not just about physical experience, though that's what the definition from the dictionary says. It also has to do with intuitive perception. So if we look here on the right, we can see that perception is not reality. So that's the point about this. Is that little girl actually that big? No, she's not. Is he actually holding that between his fingers? No. Perception is like a lens, like I was saying. The better the prescription of the perception, you could say, the more accurate or more clear you're going to see that which is. So our work here is to align perception with reality. Our work here is to align that frequency to the best of our capability to that which is. What truth, you say? The truth that you are enslaved. This is best depicted in the allegory, The Matrix. Morpheus says to Neo, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? Neo says. Morpheus replies, that you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot see, taste, or touch. A prison for your mind. And currently, the prison for your mind equals a world prison. Because if the brain is in chains, the world is in chains. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And this is something that I feel people need to really feel deep down. They need to understand how enslaved they really are. And this guy's name is German, so it's not pronounced like it's written. Johann von Goethe is his name. So we need to take a look at the basics of the brain function. And we also need to think about this in correlation to consciousness. So consciousness is threefold, or triune. It is thoughts, emotions, and actions. Those are the three basic modes of consciousness. Thoughts is the father, the idea, or the mind, the initiation of the process. Emotions is the creative, or the emotional complex, obviously. The sacred feminine, and action being the divine offspring of the alchemical wedding between the two. When these are in proper alignment, like I'll be talking about later, the action is very useful, productive, and moral. So the body, or the brain itself, and I kind of look at the entire body as like a brain now. It's just very interesting when you start to understand the intelligence of the entire body. Obviously, the entire body is not a brain, but we have to understand that it is the emergent property from it, from consciousness. So the brain is the seat of consciousness, as some people put it, or the organ which allows us to connect to consciousness or spirit in the flesh, mind in the body. The cerebrum is the large part of the brain containing the cerebral cortex, consisting of two hemispheres separated by a fissure. It holds many subcortical structures as well. Brain health plays a critical role in human thoughts, emotions, and behavior. It's extremely important for human beings to become familiar with the brain's basic structure and function. I think it's extremely important for them to understand the three aspects of consciousness correlated to these as well. The human brain is the most powerful computer known. It possesses about 100 billion neurons, 1 quadrillion connections known as synapses. Its storage capacity is up to 2.5 petabytes and no lower than 100 terabytes. It processes 400 billion bits of information a second, and to simulate 1 second of brain activity takes 82,944 modern processors. So we're starting with the floor of the house, which is the oldest part of the brain. It is known as the R complex, or the reptilian brain, the reptile complex, also known as the cerebellum, which is Latin for little brain. This region of the brain controls motor functions, respiratory, minor cognitive abilities, aka basic survival mechanisms, fight or flight. So this is what really kicks in when we're in those stressful scenarios and all of our blood moves from the viscera into the arms and into the muscles. And this is connected mostly with the left brain hemisphere. This part of our brain really facilitates our most primal instincts. It stores all of the most prevalent fears that we have, like abandonment or darkness or predators, fear of death and things like that. The brain itself is the seat of consciousness, and it is the organ to connect consciousness to the body. And consciousness is in three folds, so we can understand that thoughts are the initiation process, emotions are the generative expression, and then actions are the manifested results. So emotions are the sacred feminine, and then you have thoughts, which is the father, the mind, and then you have actions, which is divine sun, that which is piercing into reality, becoming solidified as that which is. It goes thoughts, emotions, and then actions. So sacred masculine father, sacred feminine mother have an alchemical wedding, and then they have the divine offspring or son, which is the action. The next part of the brain is the limbic brain, or the Paleomammalian cortex, or the mammalian brain, the mammal brain, which is what facilitates and makes possible the emotional responses. And we can see this very readily in animals, obviously. Thus why we named it after the mammal. The animal kingdom has a high spectrum of emotions that a lot of people really don't tend to be conscious of. So it has a lot to do with formation of long memories, learning and motivation. It produces medium cognitive abilities. And this is where the subcortical structure meets the cerebral cortex. It is connected mostly to the right brain, and it can be looked at as the sacred feminine component, like I was talking about. This is the middle chamber, and it is what allows us to experience a spectrum of emotions as human beings or even animals. It is a very important part of our experience here as spiritual beings. The most evolved and newest section of the brain is the telencephalon, or more commonly referred to as the neocortex. Neo is Latin for new, and cortex is bark or rind, so it's new rind or new bark, as in the outer layer, the outer shell. The neocortex of the brain has two hemispheres. The left hemisphere largely facilitates logic, intellectual thought processes, while the right hemisphere largely facilitates creativity and intuitive thought process. This is the part of the brain that makes us human. This largely facilitates higher order thought function, maximum cognitive ability, logic, reason, language, art, music, and conscience. Obviously, when it is in proper working order, that is. It is the most evolved part of the brain, and it is what separates us from the animal kingdom. So it is the part of the brain that allows for true holistic intelligence to take place within a being. So let's take a look at the bird's eye view of the brain. And we see that on the left here, it's red, representing the sacred masculine component. So the left brain facilitates, like I was saying, thoughts, logic, analytical components. It is an aggressive modality of consciousness. It deals with matter, finite things, linear processing. It can be looked at as a solar representation and a masculine archetype, or the sacred masculine archetype, or the yang principle. And off to the left here we see a masculine archetype symbol, which is a rudimentary phallic symbol. And it is a masculine symbol because it is piercing. It is a point. It comes to an edge, like the masculine energy. We could also look at the sacred masculine energy as electricity. The right side of the brain here is blue, symbolizing the sacred feminine, which is the emotional, the creativity, the intuitive, the passive. It deals with the spiritual. It's a lunar correlation or representation, and it can be looked at as the yin energy. We see on the right side a inverted triangle representing the womb or the chalice, and that is also a sacred feminine archetype symbol. So we can see that both of these energies need to be unified to really come into holistic intelligence and internal balance, or internal non-dualism. This is a wonderful depiction of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine alchemical wedding, with the Holy Grail in the middle, and you have the Star of David, or the Seal of Solomon. The masculine archetype represents the sun or the day. On the right, the feminine archetype represents the lunar or the night, or also the spiritual, because the night was often associated with the spirit. So was the sacred feminine. It still is. So I thought this was a beautiful depiction of the alchemical wedding, or the allegory that I'm trying to relay here. So this picture can be an analog for the human brain, and we're going to look at a variety of different types of allegories and analogs, especially when we dive into symbolism in part 2. We'll be correlating the brain to many different traditions and their artistic expressions. So at the beginning of this presentation, there's a slide, and that slide is the first degree tracing board of the Entered Apprentice of Freemasonry, and we will be covering that in part 2. But going back to this image, we can see how we could look at this as a human brain, and we can see how the right brain is the sacred feminine again, and the left brain is the sacred masculine, like I was talking about before. And the phoenix being at the top, the star and the Holy Grail in the middle could be looked at as the corpus callosum. So what happens if we fall into an imbalance in these hemispheres? If the human being's left brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the R complex will take over executive function of the brain, emotions will become suppressed, and the person will become ruled by selfishness and base desires and develop a personality based on domination and control. So this is what we could look at as masterthink. If a human being's right brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the limbic system will take over executive function of the brain. Defense and survival instincts will become suppressed, and the person will be ruled by their emotions and develop a personality based on submissiveness and naivete. So this is what we could look at as slave think, and this is the very simple diagram of the master-slave relationship and how they play off of each other to create this bond of slavery, because that's what it is. It's a bond between the master and the slave. The part of the brain that is the great mediator between these two is the corpus callosum. We need to work together with this, is what it says in the slide that I have popped up on the screen here. And that's what the corpus callosum is saying to the two hemispheres. That is the section of the brain that allows the transmission of electrical and chemical interaction between the two hemispheres. As an analog, let's take a look at the brain from an imaginative perspective. Correlate this to the ship from Star Trek known as Enterprise. If the bridge of the ship happens to be damaged, then all of the command centers will fall back into lower functions. It might go into engineering, etc. And engineering we could look at as the reptilian complex, obviously. So depending on what kind of damage that has taken place in the neocortex or the telencephalon, other functions, subcortical functions, lower level functions will start to take executive role to substitute for the higher level thinking. Thus, it becomes very limiting and detrimental, though in real scenarios it is needed. Without these sub-levels of functions, we would have no defensive mechanisms against damage to our brain. Another thing I'd like to point out is that most people are in these modalities of imbalance throughout the day at different periods. So what I mean by that is, during a certain time of the day or during certain interaction with certain people, they might have an imbalance of the right hemisphere, which they will be passive and enslaved think. And vice versa, you might see this when they are around other people they feel they are above or can dominate and take advantage of. So they are in master think. They're dominating. You'll see that a person will have a primary imbalance, meaning primarily left brain or right brain, but they also can fall into the other imbalance as well. It's not that you're just leaning one way, but the primary is the most important to understand, because that is where the executive functions will be traceable to understand what component of the brain is actually in control. So what we're looking to do is to bring the brain into balance. We want both the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine archetype energy to be in an alchemical wedding or dance. And this is what we could call free think. When both hemispheres are in balance, the neocortex acts as its proper role as the executive command center of the human brain, and true intelligence is born. And true intelligence is really intellect and the generative capacity of creativity. So, that's where we get the word intelligence. Intella comes from intellect, and then gens comes from to generate, which is to create. So obviously I'm not trying to give you all of the finite details of the advanced study of neurology or neuropsychology, but this is kind of an aggregated initiation into the prerequisites that are especially necessary for what I'm going to cover later on, and for the initiation process of the individual's own consciousness. We have to understand the triune nature of consciousness and its manifested form in the triune brain, or the correlation to the triune brain. So we could look at this kind of as spiritual neuropsychology, a triune aspect, yet again. So moving towards the extremes of either polarity of intellect or emotions can act as a divisive force which holds us back from true care and right action. We must engage our willpower at an individual level to unite these polarizing forces. So you can see on the screen here the being torn in two between thoughts and emotion, and this is what we're referring to as internal dualism, when we don't have true heart-based consciousness. And it happens to us all, and we've all went through it, and none of us are trying to be perfect beings, but we're seeking to hold these states of consciousness for longer and longer periods, like I was talking about with the frequency. You're seeking to increase your frequency rate and over time build up momentum, because we're looking at the law of inertia. Objects that are not in motion don't like to move, they don't want to go anywhere, and they stay exactly where they're at. And objects that are in motion continue to build up more motion, etc. But that process, that first area of crescendo between getting the thing going is some of the hardest parts. You know, imagine if you're on an island and you're trying to overcome the current or the tide coming in, trying to escape the island. So that's an example of that resisting factor that you can overcome with enough willpower. Knowledge, courage, willpower, and right action, in addition to true care, must be equally balanced parts of the equation of higher consciousness. So you're not a higher level conscious being if you're not in knowledge of natural law, have courage and willpower to do what is right, and this is all, you know, correlated to true care. So the word conscious comes from the Latin prefix con, which means together, and sciere, which means to know. And it is the ability to be aware, perceive, and understand patterns and relationships between the self and the environment in which the self operates in. Knowledge of self is really what it's talking about. Conscience is pretty much the same thing. It has the same roots. And it is the part of the mind that makes you aware of your actions as either being right, correct, and moral, or wrong, incorrect, or immoral. So it is the common sense knowledge between right action and wrong action. This knowledge is discoverable by all beings that have the capacity for holistic intelligence. Internal non-dualism, like I was talking about. We should always seek to be in internal non-dualism, for it is the true alignment of oneself. When thought and emotions are contradictory or divided, our actions become very harmful and useless for forward progression and evolution. This is a symptom of cognitive dissonance or the schism of the mind, which negatively affects how we make our decisions and interact with others. True wisdom is right action and can only be a result from the alignment of thoughts, emotions, and actions. Carl Jung said, where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. We think, so we feel, then we act. So this is what I was talking about, internal non-dualism, bringing in balance between the sacred masculine and sacred feminine components of consciousness. Do you know natural law? And if not, why not? What is the reason for you not knowing about natural law? Well, this section, actually this whole Part 1, the initiation into natural law, is for those who do not understand natural law or have never even heard of it or are curious about the mysteries of its workings. So what is natural law? Natural law is a body of universal, non-man-made, binding and immutable conditions which act as the governing dynamics for the consequences of human behavior. The type of natural law that I am speaking of is not the quote-unquote natural order or the Darwinian theory. We're talking about moral, karmic law. So natural law applies to all beings with the capacity for holistic intelligence. When the living organism or being has the ability in the mind to understand the objective difference between right and wrong, natural law applies to them. So animals are not included in this understanding of natural law. If a lion goes out and kills its prey for its dinner, it's not held under the same moral boundary conditions that we are, because it is incapable of understanding right from wrong. And that's why the brain is so crucial for understanding, because then we understand why this level of natural law applies to us and not them. Their capacity for expressions into reality are limited. They are not capable of understanding or reasoning this law. Thus, they are not bound by it. So you cannot observe the lions in nature or the animals in nature and understand what I'm talking about here today. What does it mean to understand natural law? Understanding natural law means truly having conscience, which is the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between morally right behavior and immorally wrong behavior. What is the result we get when we live in harmony with natural law? When the aggregate of humanity lives in harmony with natural law and therefore are moral beings, they become and remain free, and their society exists in a state of true order, meaning functioning and evolving and prospering. What is the result we get when we live in opposition to natural law? When the aggregate of humanity lives in opposition to this law, and the mass majority are therefore immoral beings, they become and remain enslaved, and their society exists in a state of violence, slavery, and unnecessary chaos. We'll be talking about this more later in the Anarchy section, but in the aggregate is how this law really plays out. This law is also known as the law of cause and effect. Effect invariably follows cause, and for every action there exists an equal and opposing reaction. This has also been labeled as the law of attraction, and not the New Age false variant of it. The energy you emit is the energy you attract. Energy flows where attention goes, and as you think, feel, and act, so shall you be. It is also known as karma or moral law. You reap what you sow. And it's also been named the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, or do not do unto others which you would not have done unto yourself. It's more accurate, but it's still very ambiguous. And I think that we need to have a full understanding of rights to lose the ambiguity and in these vague concepts. So I thought I would explain to the laymen why I chose the image that I did to represent natural law. For those who are familiar with the Egyptian mythology, I'm sure they already understand. But even to the laymen, I'm sure a layman can recognize that this is Anubis in this picture, who was the guide of the underworld, or the guardian of the underworld, who would guide the soul through the duat, through the afterlife, or would be the guardian of the gates of the afterlife. It just depends on, what time period you're looking at the mythology. I wanted to give a good example of natural law, and I thought this was a very good example. You see it commonly used as a representation of natural law now. So we see in this picture the scales of justice, and then we see the heart being weighed against the feather of Ma'at, or the feather of truth. You also see in the background the beast, which is the part lion, hippopotamus, and crocodile, which are the three largest man-eating animals known at that time in ancient Egypt. Ma'at was a female goddess in the Egyptian culture who represented truth, justice, balance, morality, and cosmic order, or natural law. So this is an image of what I was just talking about. Often the feather of Ma'at was a distinctive feature of her headdress. Less frequently, images of the goddess showed her without a head, instead replaced by the feather. In other images, the feather alone conveyed her presence. This feather has come to symbolize her being, as well as the representation of balance and order in the universe. It became the hieroglyph for truth in the Egyptian culture. So if you were lighthearted and you passed I believe it's called the Negative Confessions, or the 42 Questions of Ma'at, which are all based around morality and the understanding of natural law. And you can look these questions up and see for yourself what I mean. But if you were heavier than the feather, then your soul would be sent to the beast, Amut, the devourer or soul eater. And I highly recommend people to look into this mythos so that they can get a more clear and in-depth understanding of it. In part 2, we will be touching on some Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology and Roman mythology, specifically the anthropomorphication of elemental powers. But this is meant to be the initiation process, not the intermediate class. I also feel that the most important thing that we could start off with is the information I just relayed to you, the understanding of truth, the understanding of natural law, and this next section that we're going to be moving into will be about rights and a little bit more detail into these basic concepts I just covered. So now let's take a look at the comparison of natural law to man's law. Natural law is in the green column on the left. Obviously, it's blatantly labeled. It is based upon principles and truth inherent to reality. It is harmonized with due to knowledge and understanding. It is universal, which means it exists and applies anywhere in the universe regardless of location. It is eternal and immutable, which means it exists and applies as long as existence exists and cannot be changed. That's a tongue tangler. Man's law, based upon dogmatic beliefs, which are constructs of the human perception or mind, complied with due to fear, coercion, and punishment. So usually we only obey man's law because we are afraid of punishment. Most people only go along with man's law because of fear of punishment. It's like this old false way of training animals, which is a form of trauma-based mind control, is really what it is, not euphemized. You beat the animal when it does wrong so it learns to not do it, instead of raising your consciousness and your intelligence to learn alternative ways so that you do not have to harm the animal. And trust me, there are many alternative ways. It differs with location based upon the whims of perception, so it's morally relative. Moral relativism is the idea that man gets to make up what is right and wrong, that he is the determiner of whether it is that. Now, don't confuse this with determining what objective right and wrong is. This is stating that he can turn a wrong into a right or a right into a wrong on the whims of his own perception and likes and desires, wants, etc. Thus, a person could do harm and violate and then just say, well, that's just fine. It differs with time based upon the whims of perception, more moral relativism. And I'm going to get to a little breakdown of moral relativism later on in the presentation. So let's take a look at man's law in comparison. So yes, sometimes man's law can be in harmony with natural law. A simple one is do not murder. If man's law is in harmony with natural law, it is inherent, self-evident, and therefore redundant and irrelevant to have such a law in place. If man's law is out of harmony with natural law, it is immoral and therefore should not be obeyed. Either way, man's law becomes irrelevant to have and only holds us back as a false religion from furthering our evolution and freedom as a species. All man's laws are antithetical to any society's progression. It is thereby the means for violence to be widely acceptable as social norms onto the people it claims to protect. Under these conditions, people are dulled to the truth of the overall grotesque situation or condition of slavery, which they now love. So this is the idea of loving your servitude. Stockholm Syndrome. They are perpetually seeking change in the realm of effects, failing to understand causality, which lies in the realm of consciousness. Let's state that again. They are perpetually seeking change in the realm of effects, failing to understand causality, which lies in the realm of consciousness. And we're going to get to that in depth in the solutions part of this presentation. But just ponder on that. Think about it. The realm of effects, what am I talking about? The realm of causality, what am I talking about? So as we can see, simply, man's law is a euphemism for slavery. Just like almost all these other institutionalized dogmatic belief systems. These are natural law expressions. This is a diagram that Mark Passio has used, and I've seen other people use this diagram as well. I feel it's pretty accurate to a basic understanding of how these polarities work. So if we look at the top columns here, you have high frequency, which is a positive frequency, and low frequency, which is a negative frequency, which we talked about in the perception section. And then below that, we have the generative polarities. One is love, which we're going to refer to as consciousness expansion. And we're talking about agape, universal love. On the other side, we have the negative generative polarity, fear, unconsciousness contraction, the thing that contracts and squeezes tight. So this is what we use to create with. You could say this is the resource of consciousness. We're either building with love or we're building with fear. We're either expanding consciousness or we're contracting consciousness. The way this starts, or going back to, the base of the temple, the epistemological relevance is the initiating expression, knowledge, the acceptance of truth and morality, meaning you know that solipsism is false, that truth is objective, that morality is an expression of that, built as the governing dynamics of karma or natural law. The opposite initiating expression is ignorance, refusal of truth, and morality. So, this can get us into the solipsistic mindset. But you can be a solipsist and not, or you can be ignorant and not be a solipsist. So you can refuse truth and morality and still not be a solipsist. But there is a relationship between solipsism and people who are thinking that truth is subjective. Some people think truth is subjective, but knowledge about that can be known, etc., etc. So you can get into all those finite details if you study philosophy and have conversations with some decently intelligent people. So ignorance, to ignore truth, the refusal, the willful, sheer act of ignoring. The willful, sheer act of ignoring. So what happens on the inside? Internal expression. We understand our sovereignty. We have knowledge of truth. We're understanding natural law. So we understand that we rule ourselves and we do not rule anybody else. The opposite to that would be internal confusion, which could be looked at as internal anarchy. Since anarchy means the absence of ruler or masters, this would be considered you not ruling yourself on the inside. So you see, you have sovereignty, you're the internal monarch, the one king of yourself, not anybody else. And then internal anarchy, vice versa, would be nobody is ruling you on the inside. Not you at all. You're not ruling yourself. You are out of control. Pretty much ego is in control. External expressions. What happens in society when we go down these pathways? So if we're building with love, knowledge, and the understanding of sovereignty, externally we get anarchy, which is freedom. I don't think any more needs to be said on that. That's what happens. On the other side, if we continue down the path and we're building with fear, ignorance, and confusion, we get slavery, which is external monarchy. And then the final layer of this is manifested result. The manifested result, what has been created? Is it good? Is it moral? Is it functioning? Meaning, is it in order? Yes, that's what freedom is. It is true order. It doesn't mean chaos, which would be the opposite, which I refer to as unnecessary chaos or man-made chaos. Man-made chaos. There's a natural chaotic tendency in the universe, but really it's just orderly, yet undefined as a pattern by our consciousness. We haven't discovered it as order yet. It's just what level you're looking at it from. And chaos is really an illusion in nature, if you think of it that way. Now, a lot of people ascribe to the chaos theory, and I think that there is a lot of good points in that. But you never hear about the syntropic force of the expansive force. The point here is that we're saying this type of chaos, this manifest result of evil or chaos, is an unnecessary result. It is unnecessary suffering and unnecessary slavery. It is a choice. So going back over to the good or the order, let's say like a soda machine, right? If the soda machine is not functioning, it is out of order. Do we say it's chaotic because it's not functioning? Well, no, not necessarily, but we could say that. We could say it's chaotic because it's not functioning within an orderly process. So if we look at the universe, well, is the universe functioning? Well, yeah, the universe is functioning. But if we look at society, well, is society functioning? Well, no, it's not functioning. So we're definitely in the right column of this. We're definitely a species of ignorance, not nescience. So we can go back to the definition of nescience at the beginning. We have the knowledge now. We are in the apocalypse. An apocalypse means simply the revealing or the unveiling. Apo, to remove, and kalyptine, the veil, or that which is hidden. So we have the knowledge now to understand and really live in harmony with natural law, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be living in harmony with natural law. And we're going to get into whether evil is necessary later, and this will correlate to our universal view, how we see the universe, whether it's good and evil, or however we look at that, And I just want to state now that if you look at the entire universe as half good, half evil, then you are in a religious notion that is holding back your progression of ascension in consciousness. And we'll get to that. So if we build a society that is based on love, knowledge, sovereignty, and it produces freedom, the society is in a state of freedom, then it is functioning and is orderly. And it is in harmony with nature, the way that nature works. Can you imagine people? Can you imagine people that are so scared that What I mean is that they're so scared to let go of slavery and control on them, that they would rather stay in a state of violence and chaos than to actually seek true freedom. It doesn't even cross people's minds. I guarantee that most people think freedom is given to them. Given to you. Think about that. Freedom has to be given to you. Bullshit. Absolute garbage. It's not a privilege. It's a state of being. It's an expression of consciousness. People will say that fucking shit is garbage. But yeah, they'd rather accept a society based on slavery and violence than to actually deal with the local thugs, because they want to have the organized thugs come and take out the smaller thugs for them, not even realizing that they're being extorted and claimed to be slaves by this system. That's what the system is. It's slavery, and that's what I'm here to fucking tell you today. That's what I'm here to tell you today, that this system is slavery. The whole world has it. There isn't a place that doesn't have it. Our species is enslaved. The world is in chains. There's no escape from it. There's no savior. You know, pick your flavor of your savior here. No, you're your only savior. That's why we're here. We're here to learn the spiritual lesson. It's like this place is a freaking prison for thieves to learn the lesson to not steal. All right, we're going to move on. And just so we understand some mind control, these social engineers of our day use primal fears to manipulate people. So they use this right column to manipulate people. So there are two forms of mind control: soft-based mind control and hard-based mind control. And anybody that's interested in reprogramming themselves, they should really look into techniques of mind control. Continuing from my rant just a moment ago, just because you're afraid bad things is going to happen does not somehow magically make slavery and violence legitimate. Get it through your head. So I'd like to give some wisdom from the founding fathers and a little bit of caveats before I start using any of these and it triggers people. I don't hold these people up to like some super spiritual perfection or, you know, like they've reached enlightenment or anything like that, but they definitely were very enlightened for their time. And of course, what happened after the American Revolution was the setup of the government, and that was their failure. Slavery should have been ended back then, but you know, they took that out of the Declaration, unfortunately, because they wanted the support of the South. So, not getting into that anymore, Benjamin Franklin said, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters." So he's saying that, you know, as a nation becomes more immoral, slavery is manifested. Sam Adams says, "The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superpower on the earth and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule. Dr. Benjamin Rush said, freedom can exist only in a society of knowledge. Without knowledge, men are incapable of learning and knowing their rights, and where knowledge is confined to few people, liberty can neither be equal nor universal. Absolutely true. If you can't think, you can't know, and if you can't know, then you won't act. Those who don't know won't say no. Thomas Jefferson said, if a law is unjust, a man is not only right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so. And just so we're clear about what I mean about militia, a well-organized anarchist militia, is exactly what the founders were talking about. The whole body of the people that are capable of bearing arms. Okay? And I also would recommend the presentation by Mark Passio, The True Meaning of the Second Amendment. The militia is not the military or the police force. So we've been hearing a lot about right and wrong, violence and force, natural law versus man's law here in this presentation. A lot of people don't ever even ask what is a right or what is a wrong. And as we see at the bottom here, a right is any expression of a sentient being that does not violate or harm another sentient being. It's the principle of non-aggression. A right is based in truth, aka correct. It's synonymous with being moral. Actions that do not harm or violate other sentient beings, thus is in harmony with natural law. A wrong is not based in truth, aka incorrect, synonymous with immoral. Actions that do harm or violate other sentient beings, thus not in harmony with natural law. A right is an expression, and nobody could ever explain how many rights you have. Everything I do that does not violate or tread upon somebody else's or sentient being's right to express themselves. It's easier to understand rights in the apophatic, the negative sense, to look at the wrongs, because there's far less wrongs than there are rights. So under natural law, rights are equal. Rights are innate and are derived directly from nature. Nobody grants them to you. They're not privileges. They are expressions of consciousness that are not overstepping their boundaries, like I said. Everyone has the exact same rights. No one has any more or less rights than anyone else. Since rights are not created by humanity because they exist objectively and inherently in nature, no human being or group of human beings is actually capable of granting rights to anyone else, nor is any human being capable of revoking rights from anybody else. You can't take them away from people, can't limit them. It all comes back around. It all evens itself out eventually. So natural law is equal and cannot be granted or revoked by anybody. All rights for all under natural law. Doesn't matter what culture you're from, what race you are. It doesn't matter if you are an extraterrestrial and you have the capacity to understand morality. You are still bound by the same law. Freedom, morality, and the human dignity of the individual consists precisely in this, that he does good not because he is forced to do so, but because he freely conceives it, wants it, and loves it. The philosopher and anarchist Bakunin. He is saying that you can't force people to do good. You can only inspire them to make the right choice. You can only hope to influence them. If you take violence to make good things happen, you're still adding violence into reality, and it cannot be changed. It is thus set in stone as that which is. You're not actually creating any good. Two wrongs don't make a right. They make two wrongs, or a bigger wrong, actually. Force versus violence. What is force and what is violence? So we see you have a bully. The bully finds a victim, beats the victim up. The victim, enacts self-defense. The teacher comes out and says, you both are wrong, you both have done violence, and you both are in trouble. Well, no, that's not right. Actually, the boy who was defending himself was in the right, and he should not be in trouble whatsoever, because the person who initiated the wrongful use of force is the one that's in the wrong. We need to get this through our heads, what force compared to violence is and what self-defense is. We're going to talk about self-defense here. So force, the capacity to generate the moral initiation of physical change. Actions that are in harmony with natural law because they do not violate other sentient beings' rights. Actions which one always possesses the right to take, including self-defense. Actions that never result in a destruction of freedom, therefore is in harmony with natural law. Okay, so what's violence? The capacity to generate the immoral initiation of physical change. So there's a big difference there. The moral initiation of physical change, the immoral initiation of physical change. So I'll just go back to what a right is to understand what morality is. Then you understand. The immoral initiation of harmful actions that are in opposition to another sentient being's natural rights. Actions which one never possesses the right to take. Never. Absolutely. Actions that do result in the destruction of freedom. Therefore, it is in opposition to natural law. So these are the basic transgression or wrongdoings, violations of other sentient beings' rights. And this is what I mean about looking at rights through the apophatic method. So we're going to take a look at what the general wrongs are. These are all the base wrongs that we need to understand and fully recognize so that we can defend ourselves properly to when they are initiated on us, because they are all forms of violence. And we're going to see here how they're all forms of theft, murder, the theft of another person's life, the removal of one's right to exist in a physical form, the removal of one's free will and ability to create, exist, and be, and love. We know what this means. Murder, absolutely a violation of another being's right and is theft. Assault, the initiation of physical harm, the theft of another's well-being, meaning safety and security, meaning that they have the right to be left alone. They have the right to not be harmed. So assault is the initiation of violence. No such thing as an assault rifle, by the way. It is simply a semi-automatic rifle, not an assault rifle, or a rifle, a long rifle, short rifle, automatic rifle. Not assault until the actual process or the actual action has taken place to initiate violence on another. Rape, the removal of somebody's right to exercise a choice to whom they wish to morally, sexually engage with. Theft of moral choice and another's well-being. So theft of choice, security, theft of physical security, violation of the body, harmful actions against another being. These are universal. We know this. If my sister goes to Pluto and she gets raped there, it doesn't matter if that culture has even a law in place that says it's okay. It doesn't matter. It's still rape. It's still wrong because it doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't matter if it's done by an interdimensional, extraterrestrial, human, still wrong. Theft, the taking of somebody else's property that is not rightfully yours. That's what all these are. Trespassing, the removal of one's right to security and safety in one's own space of living. So we all have a right to be left alone. We have a right to have our own secure location. And property, rightful property. Not wrongfully possessed property, rightfully possessed property. Coercion, the use of intimidation or threat of violence for means of making another person or group of people to act in an involuntary manner, and theft of one's consent or free will or choice. So it's the initiation of, you do what I say or I'm going to do violence on you, which is like a thug in the street. Pulls a gun out or a knife and threatens you. You give me your wallet or I'm going to kill you. It's coercion. So we can see on the right-hand side here, taxation is theft. We're going to get to that here in a little while, but it's absolutely theft. Vandalizing people's property, breaking in, stealing people's stuff, holding them up, stealing from them, destroying, like in these riots and stuff where people are destroying property that does not belong to them, thinking that they're going to bring down the state by attacking the slaves that are in the same condition they're in. Fucking idiots. We see at the top here a cop, an order follower, beating down a civilian who is obviously submitting. All wrongdoings are forms of theft. They are all a form of theft. All wrongdoings are a form of theft. Absolutely. You can't think of one that is not, because there are none. They're all about stealing something that does not belong to you. They're all about taking something that is not yours. That's what slavery is. That's what violence is. That's what coercion, murder, rape, trespass, that's what they all are. So self-defense. Well, a lot of people think that self-defense is violence. Well, let's take a look at a boxing match or an MMA fight. A lot of people would say that that is a violent scenario. Well, they're actually wrong. Nobody's rights are being violated there because both participants are engaging in combat of force, which is their voluntary process to do so. Nobody is holding them under a gun or a barrel. They're not, in any kind of coercion to do this, etc. They are participating in this act voluntarily. Thus, it is on both sides nonviolence. It is an act of force. Now, an act of violence is when there is a party who is not participating, means they do not want this done onto them. They are not interested in this. So this being who is the opposite party of the initiator of violence or the wrongdoing has the complete inherent right of self-defense. Absolutely. All beings do, no matter what. All beings accosted with violence possess the innate right of self-defense to stop those who are conducting the initiation of violence with equal and or more force. They by all means can forcefully defend themselves against violence to stop it from continuing, up to and including deadly force if or when necessary. Knowing the difference makes all the difference in this scenario. Absolutely. Self-defense is not violence. Self-defense is an act of love. True self-defense is absolutely an act of love, and people need to get this through their head. Self-defense is nature's eldest law. John Dryden. Malcolm X said, "I don't even call it violence when it is in self-defense. I call it intelligence." And I concur with that statement. Self-defense is justly called the primary law of nature. So it is not, neither can it be in fact taken away by the laws of society. Absolutely true. And that quote was by William Blackstone. So we can see, that they're talking about this as a natural law. It is inherent. They're even claiming it's the oldest law of nature. And I absolutely concur that it is intelligent. That's why I call it an act of love. Because true self-defense is an act of love. Here's a few more quotes on self-defense. James Berg says, who is the author of The Ideological Origins of the Second Amendment, The possession of arms is the distinction between a free man and a slave, it being the ultimate means by which freedom was to be preserved. You know, we have the right to keep or to have, to own, to retain possession of, and bear any form of arms for self-defense. It doesn't matter. Arms are not just firearms. It means any form of item that can be used for the means of defending oneself, etc. And it doesn't matter. The Second Amendment doesn't matter. That's just there to help secure that. It's just a piece of paper. This is inherent. It is inherent in nature itself, and it's not going away. And I personally abhor weapons. You know, I personally think they're disgusting. But I understand the realism of the situation, and we all need to be properly trained in the weapons that are needed for self-defense. And if that means firearms in this day and age, and it means firearms, I think we even need to be trained in more sophisticated weapons. Good luck trying to take it away. Good luck trying to get totalitarianism here. The right of self-defense never ceases. It is among the most sacred and alike necessary to nations and to individuals. James Monroe. Self-defense requires no apology. Jane Jones. And I recommend that book. So this is a self-defense zone. If you're looking for helpless victims, look somewhere else because you're not going to get it here. A very well-trained populace is a free society. Go back to the statement here that the possession of arms is the distinction between a free man and a slave. Just know that. Think about that. You know, slaves aren't allowed to defend themselves. The only way they get arms is if they're using it against other slaves. One of my favorite authors, Lysander Spooner, he says, a man's natural rights are his own against the whole world, and any infringement of them is equally a crime, whether committed by one man or by millions, whether committed by one man calling himself a robber or by millions calling themselves a government. I highly recommend reading this individual's work. Very excellent. Moving on to the next part of the presentation. Anarchy or slavery. Now this image here might be taken out of context because of its outer shell. These were just the two first images that I pulled up on Google that related to what I was trying to aesthetically and ideologically bring forward. And what I mean by that is somebody might take this as a racist thing, but it's not. We're all enslaved. And I think if you look at this in the right way, that's actually what it's showing. I personally don't believe in race. I believe in differences in knowledge and skills and obviously aesthetics or form and things like that. But as far as like the construct of race itself, we're all one race. And we should understand that. We should understand a lot of things. Moving forward. So what does anarchy mean? A lot of people have a really skewed understanding of what anarchy actually means. If you ask a lot of people out there, they most likely will tell you it's evil or chaos or terrorism, and that's obviously not what it means. So anarchy is from the Greek prefix an, without, the absence of, and the Greek noun archon, master or ruler. So you can see right here that it just simply stands for without masters or rulers. Anarchy does not mean without rules. It literally means without rulers or masters, and that's it. So, I mean, if you went out and you asked people, what is the state of no rulers and no masters? You're probably going to get an answer like freedom. I hope you would, at least. If you were to propose the question of what is anarchy, they wouldn't say freedom, at least generally speaking. You know, there are a lot of people that I've asked that have come back with great answers, one being love, but not many people directly say freedom when you ask them what anarchy means. And if you talk to the general public, you will definitely get, like what I said, terrorism, chaos, disorder, vandalism, things like that. We're going to talk about that here shortly. So anarchy means no rulers, no masters, or no slaves, or in other words, freedom. True anarchy is the state of existence where there are no masters and no slaves. Can I say it again? No masters, no slaves. That's all it means. Therefore, anarchy means the absence of all forms of slavery, or in other words, true freedom. No masters, no slaves. Let's say it again. We need to drill this repetitively into our head and drill this into other people's heads. So this is another definition. We're kind of starting out with definitions in this section. So library and liberty. These words are fundamentally related to each other. They're derived from each other. They are literally derived from the same root. Library, the Latin word liber, to peel, which refers to peeling the inner bark of a tree, like I have shown here on the right, like pages of a book. Early manuscripts were written on these barks, and from this meaning we get the modern word library, to read or to set free. All right? It literally means to read or to set free. Liberty, the Latin word liber, libere, to pour or to set free. From this we get the word liberty. So liber, we see that right in the word. And they both mean to set free. And the Greeks knew this, that you had to read to be free. You have to read. Most people are unread. So I was raised more anarchist. I was handed Animal Farm, 1984, and A Brave New World, and I read them by the time I was 12, multiple times. And I always felt personally kind of different or separate from the modern herd, especially in modern school. You know, the schools were really questionable in my mind when I was a child. For the schools that I did go to, I mean, because I was mostly homeschooled. And it kind of blows people's minds when they see how intelligent I actually am, and I tell them I was homeschooled. And I will tell you, I was not homeschooled well. I should have been homeschooled far better, but I was not. And even with my shitty homeschooling, I still came out far more intelligent than most people, and I got no problem saying that. You know, when I talk to people, I'm just astounded. It just blows me away. It's questionable where their fucking minds and hearts are at. Actually, I don't even question it anymore. I know exactly where it's at. It's in the gutter. It's in the garbage. But moving on here, that's a little background, and maybe I'll go into that more in another presentation. So liberty and library both mean freedom. They are in context of freedom. So if you look on the right here, you can see a bottle pouring out, and that's where we get, you know, to set free, to pour, liberty. So we're going to look at that. Let's break that down a little bit more. Can we find any more occult information in this? Can we find something more hidden under this essence of the etymology of this word? And I happen to dig a little deeper, and to pour is to cause a liquid, particles, or granular solid to stream and flow out or from a container. So it literally means to empty, to be set free. It's also an expression of speaking. So they say to pour oneself out to somebody, you know, to pour your emotions out. So to speak or express thyself continuously and elaborately. The word pour comes from the Latin root porare, to cleanse, to purify, or to be cleansed or purified. So you can see here on the screen I have a lady puking out all this junk, all this junk programming. And then this is a metaphor, or it can be taken literally. So you have to reprogram the mind, the body, and the spirit. You have to get these three things in alignment, and that's what's with the picture on the right. So to be set free, well, when you're being set free, it's like a purge or a cleanse of the waste from the mind, spirit, and body. You know, you're being purified. You're purifying your mind. You're purifying your emotions. You're getting conscience in order. You're getting your thoughts under control. You're reprogramming yourself. You're taking control of who you are, and you are building upon that and creating better actions for yourself and for the people you love and for the world. It doesn't matter if you don't love the entire world. I personally don't like people, but yet I'm still doing this, you know. It's not because I like people that I'm trying to help end slavery. You know, I understand that if one is enslaved, we're all enslaved, and we need to understand this knowledge and move forward in it, like I've been saying. And I'll continuously say this stuff. If I sound repetitive, well, yeah, it's like being a broken record with some of this, because we got to learn it, and sometimes you just got to go over it and over it and over it again until it is mastered, like a discipline or an art. That's true learning. Okay, so we need to purify ourselves and cleanse ourselves. Get our mind, body, spirit in order. Earlier I was talking about sovereignty and the expressions of natural laws, so let's define sovereignty. The word sovereign is derived from the Latin adverb super or super, which means above, and the Latin noun regnum, rulership, control. Thus, sovereign means one who is above rulership or control of another. Like the king is sovereign and nobody else can rule him. But in that context of sovereignty, everybody else is a slave. But literally, in truth, they're all natural sovereign beings. A sovereign means not a subject or a slave. A true sovereign is an internal monarch, one who rules himself, like I was talking about earlier. One who rules only the kingdom of oneself. The statement, I am a sovereign, is a self-declaration of freedom. So it's about self-control, self-mastery, and self-ownership. Not a slave. I am a sovereign being under nature. I am not a slave to anybody, and nobody owns me. Nobody owns you, and it's not legitimate. It doesn't matter if you write it down on a piece of paper or not. It will not change that. It's objectively set in nature, in natural law. True liberty is the essential property of objective truth and morality. Therefore, there can be no true liberty in a civilization that enshrines moral relativity. When human beings feel and act consistently within this natural law, the result will be liberty. Until then, we are simply handed privileges disguised as freedoms by our masters. It's a well-written essay called Aquinas on Liberty. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. The cult of slavery. The dangerous and dogmatic axiom of man's authority. Just take a second to really think about that image in the background there. Think about it epistemologically, or under the context of religious binding. Religion, the hidden hand, the claim of man's authority. First thing I want to get out of the way is another definition. So the word government. Well, a lot of people really overlook this, and when I first heard this from Mark, I was just so blown away because it made so much sense as soon as I heard it. I knew it was absolutely true, and I did my homework and double-check the etymology of it, and it is absolutely true. Yet a lot of people do try to argue the last part of it. But let's take a look at it. Government, derived from the Latin verb governo, governare, to control, and the Latin noun mens mentes, which is mind. So we get the word like mental from that. Government literally means to control the mind. So the etymological origins of the English suffix "ment" is often debated, yet it is overwhelmingly clear that those who created the English language over a long period of time deliberately chose "mens," the Latin word for mind, to mean the state of or condition of, in direct keeping with natural law. So think about this. The state of. This is why we call them states as well, because they are conditions of that geographical location. You know, that's what it is. The state of, etc. The condition of. So the state of controlling the mind, the condition of controlling the mind. Government is mind control. It always has been and always will be. And if you support it, you must be under it. You must be under mind control. If you physically, like willfully go out and work for it, and I'm not talking about in the ways that you can't escape that. Like I have to go to the store and buy water, so it's going to be taxed, and I can't escape that tax pretty much. There are other ways around that, but not in any kind of abundance. So, you must be under it at some level, and it has some kind of binding over your mind and over your body and over, your existence. So it's, slavery. It's the state of slavery. It's the condition of slavery. That's what this whole first part of the presentation is about. Waking people up to the condition of slavery, letting them know what they're in and some possible solutions for change, because a lot of this information can be used to defend against mind control, against physical violence, etc. Mind control. The dangerous and dogmatic axiom of man's authority, also known as slavery. Okay, let's look at some of the ideas of this. That it comes down as the divine right of kings, or God's mandate, okay, which is a political and religious doctrine that claims authority, whether it be royal, religious, or political, as legitimate. It asserts that a monarch is subject to no physical authority, deriving the right to rule directly from the will of God or the divine. And I said, a.k.a. Sky Daddy, huh? Right? The people who are watching this presentation, I hope they understand that. Which is a bullshit claim to enslave other sentient beings on this planet and label it under moral God's will. It's absolutely bullshit. The whole thing. It always has been and always will be. It literally is the idea that slavery is legitimate. There is no such thing as the divine right to rule over another sentient being, and there is nothing divine in this false notion of authority. Nothing at all. There's nothing divine in it. Nothing godly in it. There's nothing right in it. It is completely based on violence and is therefore not a right. Let's read that again. It is completely based on violence and is therefore not a right. Thus, it is 100% wrong and immoral. The belief in authority demands obedience and servitude, or else violence will be used to make you obey and submit. It's a bullshit claim. I thought this was a pretty funny thing, detecting large quantities of bullshit. Use some logic, use some reason. This shit does not hold up. And anybody that's protecting the false claim of slavery, that it's legitimate, they're not good people. You think about that. How can they be a good person if they are telling people that it's okay to be enslaved, or that it's okay to enslave another? Same thing. The dangerous and dogmatic axiom of the chain of obedience. And that's what this is, a chain of obedience. One form, locked together, linked together. They're all linked together in one form. So since we're talking about the idea of authority, we have to talk about the concept of order following, because these go hand in hand. Order following is it's up there with solipsism in my book. It's so deplorable. It is the absolute most vile belief system out there. So let's see why. All right. Order follower. This is a definition of an order follower. Let's get this out of the way. An order follower is a person who acts on command, therefore attempts to abdicate one's own personal responsibility to discern a morally right action from an immorally wrong action for themselves. Their entire mindset absolutely depends upon not exercising conscience, which is the free will choice of right action over wrong action, based upon the objective difference according to law. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that, let's say they get an order to do something good. Okay? Well, it's still an order, and they're getting paid for it. They're not exercising conscience. They're not saying, hey, this is a good action, I need to go do it. They're saying, hey, this is an order and I have to follow it. You know, this is a command. You know, they might ascribe the notion of that command being good, but their first duty is to follow the command before they think of whether it's good or not, whether they ever think of it as good, which they normally don't. There's no such thing as a good order follower. Never has been. To really assert that idea, here, let's think about it this way. If an order follower swears an oath to uphold all laws, whether just or unjust, how can that be a good person? How can you swear an oath to do whatever you're told, no matter what it is? Or you can't be under that occupation. If you don't follow the order, they fire you. Meaning you can't be an order follower. The entire occupation, the entire belief system depends upon not exercising conscience. If you exercise conscience, you're not being an order follower. A lot of people falsely think that a order follower is not responsible for his or her actions. An order follower is always more morally responsible and culpable for the actual manifested result of harm than the order giver, is more culpable than the order giver. Okay? I'm just coming right out and stating it. I'm not even going to ask you any questions like maybe Mark Passio has done. You know, I'm telling you this. They are absolutely more morally responsible and culpable. 100%. Order givers are 100% responsible for giving the order, not if the order was followed. They're not responsible if the order's followed or not. That is up to the individual who the order comes down to. The person who actually manifests or takes the actual expression of action to do it or to not. You know, it's a great depiction of what we're talking about. This is just horrible. It's just gruesome. It's grotesque. You know, and if we look up here to this aristocrat who's holding this chain of obedience to his dog, his order follower, you know, who has the money in his bowl, taking orders to do what's in that picture, to violate people for money, for a paycheck. You know, I was just following orders is never a valid justification for doing immoral actions. It's never a valid justification. You know, if we look in this picture from the great allegorical movie Silence of the Lambs, it places the taxes in the basket or else it gets the hose again. And I know that I'm not trying to impersonate that, but you can see here the police state spraying down innocent protesters. Say whatever you want. But this is what a police state is. This is a standing army in our streets, doing this to its citizens and claiming that it's here to protect them. Get the fuck out of here. You're fucking insane and you're supporting slavery. Doesn't matter where this is taking place. The entire world needs to understand that order following is not a virtue. So in no place at no time has authority ever been legitimate. This dogmatic ideology must be done away with for humankind to attain freedom. This is that purge I'm talking about. There can be no freedom in a society that enshrines moral relativism and man's authority as legitimate. Those who therefore believe in authority are in a cult of slavery. That's why I called this the cult of slavery, because that's what it is. A cult is a grouping of individuals espousing an ideology that is dangerous to the rights and freedoms of other people. That's what a cult is. This belief system is a danger to others because its entire supposition is that other people must obey without question. Submission is the quote-unquote virtue of authority. It asks of you to abandon all reason and conscience, to abdicate personal responsibility, and give up your body to its will. Otherwise, you will be accosted with violence by its dogs. And this is Gerald Massey, a quote from Gerald Massey on the side here. They must find it difficult, those who have taken authority as truth rather than truth as authority. And he's a renowned Egyptologist, and I highly recommend looking into his work. The one and only authority is truth. If there is ever an authority, the only authority that ever exists is truth. That's it. You know, that's the only authority. The truth. No man is authority. No being. No sky daddy. No solar cult doctrine. So a lot of people have the false idea that government is a necessary evil. You even heard this in the revolutionary times, but you hear it a lot, especially now. Because there's a lot of uproar in the society right now, and people are trying to figure it out. I hear it a lot from minarchists. You know, they're always like, oh, well, look here. The founder said here that government was a necessary evil, etc. The best and most powerful and most dangerous weapon of evil is to convince people that its unnecessary existence is necessary for balance. Think about it. Lots of thinking in this presentation. Think its unnecessary existence as necessary for balance. Bullshit. The belief that evil must be to balance good in the universe is a bullshit religious concept and very outdated and should never be looked upon as any kind of virtue or positive universal view. It is nothing but a cowardly justification to do nothing in the face of evil. All evil men need to take a hold of this world is for good men to do nothing in the face of evil. And if we look over here to the allegory of the Wizard of Oz, this is the condition of humanity. Cowards. Afraid to face reality. Afraid to actually stand up and do something. Evil is not necessary. Evil is a choice. Government and the state will never be and never has been a necessary evil. Those who advocate for government or state are themselves advocating for violence, chaos, and slavery. So Benjamin Tucker, a great anarchist, and I highly recommend his work to read his essays. He stated that the state is said by some to be a necessary evil. It must be made unnecessary. So even if you do think it's a necessary evil, you better start working towards it being made unnecessary, because government was never meant to take place like this. This is the opposite direction the real freedom fighters of the revolution wanted, and there was few of them. One must be very cautious when they are face to face with the enemy. For it has come to be that many become evil in the face of it. The lesser of two evils is still evil. Though it may be preferable to choose the lesser, it is always more pertinent to choose neither. It must be made unnecessary because evil is a choice. Okay? It's not just some balancing energetic force in the universe. And if you're looking at the universal energies that way, the positive and negative polarities of energies that way, you're anthropomorphizing them to the point which you're failing to understand their principles. They are not good nor evil. They are simply an energetic form. Like, let's take a battery. A battery has a positive side and a negative side. We don't say that negative side is evil, do we? Well, those are those energetic forces. That's the energetic force of electricity. But, you know, the underlying energy can be looked at the same thing. When we ascribed evil to the negative polarity of energy, we instantly correlated the sacred feminine component to evil as well. The lunar side. And this makes sense because of our primal fears, because we are scared of the abstract. We're scared of the dark. We're scared of abandonment. And the spiritual aspect is the unknown. It is the mystery. It is a form of abandonment of the material, you know, that which we can see and feel and taste and touch and hear, and you know, so we become attached to that, egoly attached to the material sense. You know, left brain ego identified with materialism, and everything must be an existential solution, etc. You know, there's no such thing as the Akashic records or the universal field that has all knowledge that has ever been experienced to tap into. You know, so going back to my point about the polarities of energy, when we ascribed the darkness to evil, and then we ascribed sacred feminine onto the darkness because of its correlation with the moon, we correlated darkness and the moon with the female because of their menstrual cycle. When we started to correlate and anthropomorphize that energy into an evil, point is to understand is that is a false notion of how the universe works. If you're looking at half the universe as evil, then you're failing to understand that half the universe is not evil. I'm sorry. You know, when a tornado takes out a tree, that's not evil. There's no free will behind it. Free will is what allows evil to manifest. Evil is an expression of free will in wrong use. That's what evil is. It's immoral actions. And those don't have to be that way. A tornado doesn't have free will. A lightning bolt doesn't have free will, you know. Stop buying into religious notions, you know. Stop buying into false New Age garbage that's teaching you wrapped up, you know, prettified romance bullshit. Nietzsche, now I'm not a firm advocate of Nietzsche's work in many areas, but he does have some very good points in his book Beyond Good and Evil, which kind of correlate to what I was just talking about. But he kind of takes it to the idea that slavery is necessary and this existential, you know, bullshit. And yeah, I mean, existentialism can be used positively in certain ways, but there's big failures in it, and we're not going to get into that right now. But Nietzsche said, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster himself, you know? And we see this a lot. We see a lot of people steer into the dark side, you know, manifesting evil in the face of evil. You know, we have to hold our integrity. We can get stern and we can get aggressive, but we have to hold our integrity. We have to hold on to our morals and principles. If government directed people to do something that their reason opposed, they were to defy the government. If it told them to do what their reason would have told them to do anyway, they did not need a government. Epictetus. Okay, so this really goes back to like the natural law principle and what I was talking about earlier on. And, you know, there is no such thing as a necessary evil. Government is not necessary. And if you think that government is necessary to prevent chaos when government itself is the state of chaos, then you fail to understand reality. So you don't need man's law, and you don't need the idea of a necessary evil, and you don't need the bad guy to have a whole crew of bad guys to run the world, and then claim that that's going to protect you from the bad guys because they're ruling you. What a great idea. Or, I mean, this is a wonderful book by Jeremy Locke, The End of All Evil. To understand freedom is to understand the value of a human being. Everything that evil wants is to disguise and destroy your value. All authority is created by evil men to disguise your worth. To understand your own worth is to understand the nature of liberty. The crucial thing for understanding our world is understanding the nature of evil. Evil challenges the value of people by denying them the opportunity to make their own choices, by denying them the chance to grow strong in learning and understanding. While evil seeks to destroy or hide a person's worth, freedom shows humans where their full potential and value is. With freedom, people have loved, cured diseases, removed hunger, eased labor, lived in peace. With freedom, happiness is possible. And I would say that the only true happiness is in freedom. You know, what's success under the guides of a ruler? You know, what is it if you become a great baseball player and you hit the world home run record and all that, but you're in a condition of slavery? I mean, yeah, that's great. Do it. Do what you want to do. Become a great musician. I love playing music. I'm a skateboarder as well. I love skateboarding, you know, but I've sacrificed a lot of my time to put into studying these things so we can get this done, because I know, hey, we're enslaved and it's more important than those things. That's the kind of mindset we have to get into. We have to become as obsessed as we are about those things as we are about freedom. The three prime evils. We're still on the topic of evil. So there are many evils, but I've chosen these ones as I feel personally. These are the ones that I see are the most dangerous. I think there's a few others I could have added in this section, but I didn't want to extend the presentation too long, so I felt that these ones were the most important to understand. And I will briefly mention the other ones after I go over these ones. These are not in order, but they are all equally relevant. The belief in authority, an illusion existing within an imbalanced psyche based entirely on violence and built upon the erroneous and dogmatic belief that some people are quote-unquote masters who have the quote-unquote moral right to issue commands, and others are the quote-unquote slaves who have the quote-unquote moral obligation to obey their quote-unquote masters. Moral relativism, the dangerous belief that human beings can arbitrarily decide what rights people have or do not have based on their own whims of personal wants and perceptions. They also believe that human beings actually are capable of delegating rights which do not exist or revoking rights which do exist. And ignorance of natural law, the willing disregard of the knowable, objective science and knowledge of the governing dynamics that determines the consequences of human behavior, aka natural law. And it is a science. This section is overt slavery versus covert slavery, or more accurately stated, comfortable slavery versus uncomfortable slavery. So overt slavery is the blatantly obvious and very uncomfortable conditions of slavery. So this would be, you know, where you're seeing people being brutally punished out in the open, whipped, hanged, brutalized, violated for not doing what they're told. And I mean, we're going to get to covert slavery, the not so obvious but comfortable condition of slavery. So this is what we have today, you know. Well, not really, but it doesn't matter. The form of slavery is irrelevant to the truth that it is and always will be immoral. Whether it be hidden or visible, it is still a condition of slavery and should never be looked at as anything other than immoral and evil. So what we have is kind of like in this right picture. We got a technocratic occultocracy, ruled by the hidden, ruled by the technocratic hidden monarchs, hidden occult sorcerers. The technocratic occult sorcerers is what it is. Technocratic occultocracy. That's what we're living in today. Ruled by the hidden. So the idea of this comfortable slavery versus uncomfortable slavery can be pretty well disputed with this meme on the right here. Slavery. If stealing 100% of the product of someone's labor is slavery, at what percentage is it not slavery? And the correct answer to that is 0%. So taxation, which is the claim of ownership over somebody's product of labor, body and property, which if someone doesn't pay, violence is used to make them comply. Slavery, the claim of ownership over the product of labor, life, liberty, and body and property, etc., which if one doesn't work or comply, violence is used to make them comply. Taxation is slavery. So even if you did believe that, slavery is hidden, which it's not hidden, most people are just ignoring that bullshit because they think ignorance is bliss. Just remember, taxation is slavery. It's not just theft. It is slavery. And we shouldn't say it any other way. Absolutely slavery. Some say since slavery is not like it was in the past, uncomfortable, it is somehow just fine to be held under duress and coercion in the present. The idea, as long as it is comfortable, it can continue, is the attitude that perpetuates the immoral state of slavery for all of us. A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers controls a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. Aldous Huxley. And that's kind of what this whole idea that it's just fine to be held under, to be held under duress and coercion in the present. I love it. I love my servitude. I love being a slave. I don't. Slavery today is not truly covert. It is visible, accepted, but highly ignored or falsely thought of as unimportant or just the way it is. It's not important. It doesn't matter if you're enslaved. It doesn't matter if you're being held under duress. It doesn't matter if innocent people are being extorted daily. It doesn't matter. Those things don't matter. Oh, it's always been this way. It's always going to be this way. There's no change. Nothing's ever going to change. Change is impossible. We're always going to be slaves. Slavery is part of human nature. Bullshit. If you think today's world is comfortable, you're out of your fucking mind. And you're not paying attention to what's going on. Once you know, it becomes very uncomfortable. If you're not outraged, then you're not paying attention. So this idea of comfortable slavery in the present is bullshit because, once you do know, or once you accept the truth and open your eyes, it becomes very uncomfortable. Actually, it already was very uncomfortable. You're just well adapted to loving the servitude. And this is the state right. This is uncomfortable. Period. We also have this false notion of temporary safety versus long-term freedom. If we look at this picture on the right, these people up in the right corner, is freedom more important than safety? What the hell is the world coming to? These kids are being brainwashed by these communist institutions that we call schools. Look into Antonio Gramsci and the march through the institutions. Understand that. Look into the Tavistock Institution of Human Relations and Social Engineering. Temporary safety under the erroneous and tedious guides of the one or ones who are or is violating you will always ensure more suffering and violence to take place. It is at best prolonging the inevitable and at worst absolute insurance of more chaos and slavery. So as Benjamin Franklin said, They who give up essential liberty, and it's actually those who give up essential liberty to purchase temporary safety, deserve neither and will lose both. This quote here was is not the original. The original is those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety, deserve neither and will lose both. Long-term freedom is the only true path to any possible real safety from violence and slavery. Long-term freedom should be the ultimate goal of anyone who considers themselves an anarchist or a truly moral being. Yes, freedom is more important than safety. Without freedom, you cannot truly be safe. You think you're safe without the freedom to keep you safe? Think about that. You're giving up your ability to keep you safe. That's what you're doing. And you're expecting safety? Listen to what I'm saying here. You are giving up the freedom to keep you safe, and you still expect to be safe? Right. That's all I gotta say, right? I mean, come on. Does it get any more fucking ridiculous than that? It's like the people who say, you should never say should. You should never say should. It's bullshit. You should give up your right to self-defense. We're going to keep you safe. You're going to be safe without your right to self-defense. What a perfect world for evil to run amok. Incrementalism, a.k.a. tiptoe totalitarianism. And this is what's been going on for a while now. And I hope people understand this. Incrementalism is the method of change by which many small changes are enacted over time in order to create a large, more broad-based change. Incrementalism abused for political agenda is the slowly and meticulously eroding of rights through obfuscation, dialectical manipulation, and long-term social engineering of human consciousness. It is the step-by-step progression into totalitarianism, a reconditioning of the minds of a society for purpose of self-inflicted slavery. History repeats. Everybody always says that. You know, history repeats itself. The best way to take control over a people and control them utterly is to take a little of their freedom at a time, to erode rights by 1,000 tiny and almost incomprehensible reductions. In this way, the people will not see those rights and freedoms being removed from them until past the point at which these changes cannot be reversed. Adolf Hitler. So, you know, this is incrementalism. This is what they're doing. You know, they're slowly and erroneously eroding rights, you know. And, I mean, it's been freaking stepped into overspeed, you know, overdrive now. The point is they've increased their plan. So when we fail to study our past, we fail to learn from our mistakes. Thus, we continue to perpetuate them. You know, to understand ourselves, we must understand history. What anarchism is not. You know, like I said, we're going to talk about what anarchism is not in this section. So there's a lot of false beliefs about anarchism. Like I said earlier, if you ask a common person, the common public, like your neighbor, what anarchy is, what it means, what's the definition of it, they would give you something ridiculous like, you know, chaos, terrorism, and disorder. These are false beliefs about anarchism. That anarchism equals chaos, that anarchism equals terrorism, that anarchism equals disorder. This is bullshit. They've convinced people. They literally have mind-controlled people to the point that they themselves, the people who want to be free, believe that freedom is slavery or it's chaos. You know, like I said earlier, they think that the absence of masters and rulers is freedom, but yet you ask somebody what anarchy is, which means the absence of masters and rulers, literally by definition, and they say chaos. And it's like, whoa, where the fuck did this concept come from? Well, I tried to trace it back in dictionaries for a while. It's been labeled chaos at least for the past 100 years, if not a little bit longer. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's been a little bit longer, almost. Okay, so my oldest dictionary is from 1828. Well, no, it's not my oldest, but it's my most accurate dictionary. And it has both versions. It's like the time period when it was starting to change, right around this time period. Because you can see that they are putting the literal definition of the absence of ruler in it. It doesn't say master. It says ruler. Archon, meaning ruler, you know. And if you look that up in the book, it says ruler or master. But then it goes on to say it's a society in a state of disorder. So you can see, like, this concept was starting to be merged, and I'm sure it's predating this, but, you know, anything after this that I found, at least in the books that I've looked in, say it's a society in a state of disorder, government in a state of disorder. So I have a way of reconciling this idea of possibly why this context was added to it. Well, yeah, it is government in a state of disorder because they're no longer in control. So yeah, it's chaos. It's chaos for the masters because they no longer have the reins over the necks of the people, and over the minds and the necks of the people. So yeah, in that context, you could use it that way, you know, that it's chaos for people who believe in slavery. But what it literally means is freedom. So anarchism, though, is by definition, anarchism is the philosophy of freedom. Philosophy comes from philos, love, and Sophie, or Sophia, which is wisdom, so love for wisdom. So anarchism, which is a philosophy, you know, a way of thinking, an ideology, thus it's an ism, philosophy of freedom would be the love of wisdom and freedom. So if philosophy is the love of wisdom, then it's the love of wisdom and freedom, anarchism, you know, or the love of wisdom in freedom, however you want to put it. But it's the love of wisdom and freedom, which are both the same thing. Freedom and wisdom are the same thing. You know, true wisdom is freedom. That's what it is. You know, it's the action. It's what we put into society. It's an expression. True wisdom is right action, thus it's freedom. It's a right. So anarchism is not chaos, terrorism, or disorder, and people really need to start hammering this into the public, hammering this into people. So I see that there are a bunch of fake anarchists out there, man. There are tons of them. It's insane. Just get on some of these social network platforms, you know, these social media platforms, and start talking to anarchists. I mean, you know, it's crazy. I'm lucky. I have a really awesome anarchist that lives over the hill from me, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, you know. So when I met this guy, I was so happy to find someone who was educated, because we're in, like, I'm living in southern Ohio, and it has the lowest rate of education in the country. It's one of the lowest. At one time, it was the lowest. I'm not sure if it still is currently this year, but at one time, it was the lowest, you know. Complete poverty around here. It's freaking, it's destroyed. Luckily, there's some cool hippies that live over the hill. You know, people who are watching this probably like, oh, we don't need to know this. We're talking about this other stuff. But the point is that, you know, there's a lot of anarchists out there that are just fucking fake-ass anarchists. They're not truly anarchists. They're anarchists in name only. You know, or in costume. They just dress up and they think they're anarchists. It's like the punk community. They think they put on some studs or some spikes, or put their hair in a certain way, or dye their hair, or do something, you know, supposedly socially rebellious, you know, yet it's all social norms now. You're not being any kind of, like, cultural rebellion, because it's all cultural norms now, you know. Like, getting a tattoo was a act of rebellion in the past, but now it's normal. So you're not going against culture. You're not anti-culture now. That is the culture for the most part. It's pretty widely accepted now. People are being hired on now with tattoos and piercings. It's pretty widely accepted. Of course, there are many places that are still strict about things like that, but, you know, they're in these costumes, and they think that's what it means. The punk community, or the rebel community, really incorporating all the rebellious subcategories of ideologies or genres, whatever you want to look at them as. Like wearing spikes. Well, what the fuck do you think that was about? That was about it wasn't about aesthetics. It was about wearing shit that was going to protect you. It comes from being battle ready. That's what it's for. That's what it's supposed to represent. Looking that hard. It's not supposed to just look that hard. You're supposed to be that hard. You're supposed to be battle ready. That's what that stuff was about. But it's about the true spiritual warrior. That's what it's about. And I talked about this in my other presentation, de-occulting spiritual skateboard. I called out fake-ass punks in this, and fake-ass anarchists, and fake-ass rebels. You're not a rebel if you're not speaking out against slavery, if you don't understand natural law, if you're not seeking the understanding of causality. You know, you're not a rebel if you're a train hopper. You think that's rebellion? You know, you think living out of a dumpster is rebellion? You got to be fucking shitting me. I lived out of a dumpster. I train hopped. And I know a lot of people that do that, and it's fine. I'm not trying to belittle your fucking way of living, you know, the nomad way or the gutter punk way or the dirt hippie way, whatever these, you know, names are. You know, I look at them all as different programs of fucking culture and different socially engineered attributes. But, you know, in all honesties, they have no idea the requirements. They have no idea what it's about. They think it just means doing whatever you want. And let me tell you, freedom does not mean doing whatever you want, and that's what we proved here today in this presentation. It's more about not doing. It's more about the apophatic, the negative. You know, because if you're doing things that destroy other people's freedom, then you're not free. You're creating slavery. You know, and what happens to them is a karmatic cycle, and it's going to come back onto you at some level or some way, whatever way that it does happen. You know, I'm not going to go into all the details about reincarnation and karma, which I personally don't believe in the idea of, you know, you get reincarnated and punished in the next life. You know, I don't believe in that. It takes away the dynamic of free will in people, and it takes you into a religious mindset of predeterminism. And it's absolutely false, you know, it's garbage. Another garbage notion that's being programmed in people's mind. I see that the overwhelming vast majority of anarchists do not understand what it means to be a true anarchist. There are many different flavors of anarchism, but just because someone may claim to be an anarchist does not make it true. I'm a fucking real anarchist, and I don't mind saying it. People are scared to use that. You should be proud to say that. You're saying, I'm here for freedom. I'm a free being. I'm a sovereign. Nobody owns me. That's what it means. Nobody fucking owns me. Nobody owns my property. And people are scared to say that because they're like, oh, I don't like labels. So they're scared to say, I'm an anarchist. You'll hear more people say I'm sovereign than I'm an anarchist. Yeah, so people have a real problem with, you know, labels. You know, they think it's somehow egotistical to label yourself. We need to label ourselves as anarchists because we need to stand up for freedom. Don't be scared of some label. It's just a fucking label. It's just a word. Why fear it? You know, it's just a statement. I think people fear the responsibility that comes with it because it's powerful when you say that, when you stand up and declare that. A declaration of freedom. I am sovereign. I am an anarchist. You don't own me. Lost word, no, you don't own me. Anarchism has nothing to do with violence, chaos, terrorism, disorder, theft, vandalism, riots, pseudo-revolutions, or any actions that destroy or harm other beings' freedom or freedoms. Whether it be through communism, socialism, fatalism, fascism, Marxism, fideism, capitalism, solipsism, etc., etc., it doesn't matter. It has no relevance. If it instigates and advocates actions that are in opposition to truth, morality, and natural law rights, then it is antithetical or contradictory to true anarchism. So if you're saying you're an anarchist and you're claiming other people's property belongs to you, or that it should be distributed, or that taxation is good, or you're an anarchist in name only, and that's it. You know, anarchism cannot be any forms of the claim of ownership over another being's mind, property, body, and product of labor, or any aspects of their rightful expressions as a being of nature. Anarchism without adjectives, but with the one condition of the law of non-contradiction. So you'll hear this phrase a lot, anarchism without adjectives. Simply sympathetic anarchism. It is the idea of being friendly to other anarchists that ascribe to different philosophies or branches of anarchism. Well, the problem with that is that, at least the branches that I've studied, all break the law of non-contradiction. All of them. Because at some form or another, they fail to recognize the simple truth that slavery is evil, that authority is evil, that moral relativism is evil. The main thing they fail to recognize is that the essence of anarchism is the love for wisdom and freedom has to do with morality. So you can't have any kind of systems of slavery in place. A lot of these other branches of anarchism are not really anarchism. They're just, things like communism wrapped up and being disguised as anarchism. Almost like they're trying to inject or obfuscate the whole thing even more because anarchism has picked up a movement. But also it's just because people are fucking dumb. What it all comes down to, the one true divide in consciousness that conquers us all. This is the one true divide. This is the legitimate divide in consciousness. Those who love slavery, statists, a.k.a. the worshippers at the altar of sacrifice. And that's what we've been talking about today. Or the anarchists, those who love freedom. And Jesus is the best archetype image of an anarchist. I am an anarchist. Most of my followers are statists, and he was killed by order followers, if you believe in the literal notion that he was a real person. I personally don't. I believe in the allegory. The allegory is what is important, not the messenger, message that's important. And Jesus was an anarchist. He's an advocator of truth, love, and freedom. But no problem can be solved by the same level of consciousness that created it. So go ahead, vote all you want. You're not going to change that shit. Your consciousness hasn't changed. You haven't fucking figured out spiritual gnosis. You haven't discovered the knowable laws of nature. The spiritual anarchist. The spiritual anarchist is a self-awakened being who knows that there can never be legitimacy to authority and government because those are simply euphemisms for violence and slavery, which are always immoral and in opposition to the universal laws or natural laws that govern the dynamic of the consequences of human behavior. And I thought this image on the right would be great as a spiritual anarchist. It's the tarot card of the magician. And for those who know, they'll know. And in part 2, we're going to be going into tarot, and we're going to break this card down. But he's here to be spirit in the flesh, as above, so below. To help others on their path to spiritual awakening. Since anarchism is based upon the understanding of the law that governs the dynamic of freedom, it is thereby reasonable to say that the anarchist is the studier of the laws of nature, which in fact are working in the unseen realm more than the seen realm. In other words, they seek to understand spirituality, consciousness, and the realm in which they function. A true anarchist must therefore seek to find a means for which they can function in accordance with the laws that they discover. Out of all these laws, the one law of freedom is the most important to understand and live in accordance with. Otherwise, they are not truly seeking freedom. The anarchist seeks to spread the light of truth, love, and freedom, and by all means, present, protect, and preserve the knowledge of natural law. Those are the 3 P's. To present the knowledge they've come to discover, to protect it, and to preserve it, which kind of go hand in hand. Therefore, the spiritual anarchist is the light occultist, or also known as a de-occultist, one who removes the hidden. Those who seek to bring light, to shine light into a room filled with darkness, to spread love. Love is not necessarily always happy. That's a false, romance novel version of love. You can be in a state of love and not necessarily be happy, but we all should seek to be happy as well. But happiness should not be our ultimate goal. We don't want to be hedonist, especially if hedonism leads us into moral relativity. So the true spiritual anarchist is, one who is here to spread truth, love, and freedom. I think people who are listening to this are most likely on their way or already true spiritual anarchists, whether they say they are or not. It depends on whether they actually are that, whether they live in harmony with that, those principles. So the de-occultist, what is a de-occultist? A de-occultist is an individual motivated by an intense intuitive curiosity and care about the hidden knowledge of the self and the realm in which the self exists and operates in. Observing the world around them and within them, they gain critical and valuable hidden information, then process that information to come to an understanding of the truth. With their great ability to discern quickly and efficiently reality from illusion, they work courageously and vigorously to advise, assist, and support others to awaken to such knowledge. Through their excellent and deductive contemplation skills, they seek to unveil and shine light upon the deceit, corruption, and lies of our world. They leave no stone unturned, and in their arduous task for truth, they always are seeking to apply solutions within their capability for real and positive change. They are in complete service to truth and love and will always act as its defenders. The light work is the right work. So you can see how the spiritual anarchist is the de-occultist. These are synonymous terms. And the key to freedom. The law of morality and freedom. This is the whole presentation. This whole first part is about the key to freedom. True love, true freedom. Morality and freedom are directly proportional to each other under natural law. As the aggregate of humanity increases in morality, freedom increases. As the aggregate of humanity increases in immorality, slavery and tyranny increase. So let's put it this way. As human beings build up wrong and violent actions in a society, then there is more slavery and tyranny in that society. As the aggregate of human beings decrease that, or decrease immorality, and increase moral action, so there's more moral actions, more rights being expressed, less wrongs and more rights being expressed, meaning that freedom increases. That's how it works. It's based on a science, and it's simple. That's so simple when you understand it. When you think about it deeply and you visualize this and you understand how the law of manifestation works. As more actions build up in the aggregate, if there's more violence in the aggregate, there's less freedom. If there's less violence and immorality in the aggregate, there's more freedom. And that's the key to freedom. That's the ultimate key. I've just handed you the key. I've given you the key to all the doors of the house. And this key will open all those doors. Because when you're in alignment with true natural law, the universe will come to aid you and assist you in the ways that it can. It doesn't choose that. It's a law that governs that. When you're in true alignment, you'll get the energy you need. It might take a minute, because like I said, it's about inertia. Building up that energy, building up the momentum, building up movement. So with this key, we can unlock human freedom. With this key, we can share a world of freedom together. We can share and hold each other's hands and be bright and shed our ego and shed the old ways and shed these old, disgusting, toxic ideologies, to purge them out of our system. And we can share this world together and live in harmony with the animal kingdom. And we have to understand the way we treat animals, is directly proportional to the state of our existence as well. I fully understand the moral backings behind natural law, and that what we do under the animal kingdom is directly proportional to our freedom as well. If we're enslaving them and slaughtering them and ignoring their suffering, then, we're going to receive consequences for that. So a system of anarchy is a solution based on the laws of nature to end slavery. That's what a system of anarchy is for. If we initiate it, the initiation of it is to end slavery, and then live in freedom. That's what it's for. It's for living in freedom, to live green, to grow green, to be free, to break our chains, to share, to cooperate, to co-create. Less violence, more love, less fear, more truth. And for all those who made it this far in this presentation, I hope that you will be interested in watching the rest, because the rest I'm going to get into a lot of really cool information about psychology, about the archetype realm, about symbology, about subversive use of symbolism. I have a whole surprise for people to unpack in part 2. So, this part 1 was to get people the important information, the most important, because I feel we're in a critical situation right now, and this is the information that needs to be understood and taught to people. We need more people to be natural law teachers. If you're going to teach something, you need to teach natural law. Well, you need to learn it first and then teach it, especially to the youth. The youth really needs to understand. And if we don't understand it, how are we going to teach it to the youth? So we have to get ourselves in order. Anarchy is freedom. Don't forget that. Anarchy is freedom. Anarchy is freedom. So here are some final quotes that I thought I would end with. So Albert Einstein said, "The world won't be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." Samuel Adams said, "It does not take the majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen to set brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." And I absolutely agree. We need the courage to set the flame. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyways. John Wayne. We got to grow some balls. We got to freaking do this together. A lot of people don't think that freedom is even possible. So I thought I'd throw these 2 quotes in here about anarchism. The anarchists never claim that liberty will bring perfection. They simply say that that its results are vastly more preferable to those that follow authority. Benjamin Tucker. Johann Most. Is anarchism possible? The failure of attempts to attain freedom does not mean the cause is lost. Freedom is possible. It is not impossible, and we can make change. I want people to understand that all the solutions will be kept until the final part. So you have to watch this in its totality, and I know this is a long presentation. Totality, you will get the best and most efficient information on this. You need to watch the whole thing to actually get the most out of it. But since I did it in this stepwise progression of 3 phases, this first part is enough to get you going. Now, all the resources, all sources and resources I've used and authors, etc., will be at the end of part 3. So at the end of part 3, I'll have all of the referencing and sources. My last statement here is that all beings have infinite value. Freedom is love. All beings are innately free. Fear is an illusion. Truth can never be destroyed. Let us work together to build a better world and bring in true freedom. Thank you very much for watching this presentation. And I'm going to end with a beautiful Buddhist prayer. May all beings everywhere be at peace. May the hearts of all beings everywhere remain open. May all beings everywhere awaken to the light of their true nature. May all beings everywhere be healed. May all beings everywhere be a source of healing for all others. May all beings everywhere be happy. And may all beings everywhere be free.